Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I grew up in a traditional Chinese family. I always felt like the black sheep. My parents, especially my mom, seemed to favor my cousin, her nephew, and my aunt's son. He's almost 50 now, and to be honest, he hasn't achieved much in life. I, on the other hand, worked hard to build my own company from scratch. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of sleepless nights and sacrifices along the way. But I persevered, and now my business is thriving. The funny thing is, my family still sees me as the loser of the family. They have no idea how well I'm actually doing. So when my mom decided to retire, she came up with this brilliant plan to help my cousin. She wanted to give him her company, a store that's been in our family for years. The deal included cheap rent since my parents owned the property. It was supposed to be his chance to finally make something of himself before he got too old. My dear cousin, in all his wisdom, decided he didn't want it because it involved hard work. Instead, he set his sights on my company, because in his deluded mind, I work less and have it easier. My mom, always trying to keep the peace, came up with a compromise. I'd buy my parents' property and business for a fraction of its worth, and in exchange, my cousin would get my company for free and pay low rent. Essentially, my mom was paying me the money my cousin should have paid. I agreed, mostly to keep the family happy and to prove I wasn't the loser they thought I was. For a whole year, we planned this transition. I was ready to hand over the reins of the company I'd built from the ground up. But then, last month, my cousin dropped a bombshell. My cousin approached me, saying he'd been thinking about the company situation. When I asked what he meant, he proudly announced that he had a great new job paying him $3,000 a month. I congratulated him, not sure where this was going. That's when he dropped his bombshell. He didn't want my company unless I paid him the difference in salary. Confused, I asked what difference he was talking about. He explained rather condescendingly that he meant the difference between his new salary and what he thought I made. A measly $1,000 a month in his estimation. I was stunned by his completely inaccurate assumption about my income and his audacious demand. I told him his idea of my income was way off. He brushed off my protest, insisting that everyone knew I wasn't doing well financially. He then had the nerve to tell me to just pay him the difference so he could take the company off my hands. Then I clarified his demand. He wanted me to give him my company for free and pay him a salary on top of that. When he confirmed this was exactly what he wanted, claiming it was only fair. After all the planning and compromises, he was trying to squeeze even more out of this deal. I refused, telling him I wouldn't pay him to start his own company and that his request was ridiculous. He tried to guilt-trip me, saying he thought family was supposed to help each other. I reminded him that I was helping by giving him a successful business, but his demand was simply too much. And just like that, the deal was off. I was left with 2 companies and not enough people to run them. But you know what? It turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I hired a realtor and put my original company up for sale. To my cousin's surprise, and probably the rest of my family's, it sold for $500,000. That's right, $500,000. When word got out about the sale, my phone started blowing up. First, it was my cousin. He called awkwardly, trying to backtrack on our previous conversation. When I told him the company was already sold, he was shocked, protesting that he thought we had a deal. I reminded him that we did have a deal, until he tried to change it at the last minute. Then came the calls from other family members, including my mom. She questioned why I didn't give my cousin another chance, insisting that family is supposed to help each other. I explained that I did try to help, but it was my cousin who backed out of the deal. She lamented that now he had nothing, to which I pointed out that it was his own fault. I had offered him a successful business, which he turned down because he thought it was too much work. Now my family knows exactly how unsuccessful I really am. Their jaws dropped when they heard about the sale price. Suddenly, I wasn't the loser anymore. I was the one they were coming to for help. Last I heard, my cousin lost that high-paying job he was so proud of. Turns out, bragging about turning down a free business and trying to extort money from family doesn't sit well with employers. As a seasoned flight attendant with over a decade of experience, I've seen my fair share of difficult passengers, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that fateful flight from New York to Los Angeles. The day started like any other. I woke up early, put on my crisp uniform, and headed to the airport. Little did I know that this routine flight would turn into a nightmare. I've been looking forward to this trip because it meant I'd have a few days off in sunny California. My sister had just had a baby, and I was excited to meet my new niece. When I boarded the plane and started my pre-flight checks, everything seemed normal. The passengers began boarding, and that's when I first noticed her. She had a scowl on her face as she made her way down the aisle. I didn't think much of it at first, but as soon as she reached her seat, all hell broke loose. The woman, who I'll call Karen, started loudly complaining that she wasn't in a window seat, which she claimed she had specifically requested. I tried to help by apologizing and offering to check her ticket. When I looked, I saw that she was indeed in the correct seat, an aisle seat. I explained this to her and offered to check for available window seats after boarding was complete. Karen wasn't satisfied with this. She got even angrier, raising her voice about how much she had paid for the flight and demanding a window seat immediately. Her shouting was drawing attention from other passengers, and my attempts to calm her down weren't working. When Karen demanded to speak to a supervisor, I had no choice but to fetch the lead flight attendant. My colleague came over and tried to reason with Karen, explaining that seat changes couldn't be made until after boarding. She promised to help if a window seat became available later. This only seemed to make Karen more furious. She accused us of discrimination and threatened to sue the airline. By this point, her yelling had caught the attention of our pilot, who came out of the cockpit to see what was going on. The pilot asked about the problem, and Karen immediately started berating him, calling the staff incompetent. After we explained the situation, the pilot tried to calm Karen down. He assured her that the staff was following protocol and asked her to take her assigned seat, promising to try to accommodate her request once everyone was on board. Karen became even more enraged, telling the pilot not to patronize her and insisting she knew her rights. Then, shockingly, she grabbed the pilot by his collar. The whole plane went silent as the pilot told Karen to let go, warning her that she was committing assault. Karen refused to release the pilot, so he told her that she would have to leave the aircraft due to her unacceptable behavior. She protested loudly, still gripping his collar. The pilot then used the intercom to call for security assistance, apologizing to the other passengers for the delay. Within minutes, 2 air marshals boarded the plane. They approached Karen and told her she needed to come with them. Karen refused, still insisting the seat was hers. The air marshals gave her a choice: leave peacefully or be removed by force. Although Karen finally let go of the pilot's collar, she wasn't going quietly. As the air marshals tried to escort her off the plane, she began swinging her arms wildly, hitting one of them in the chest. She shouted threats about having everyone's jobs as they restrained and handcuffed her. They dragged Karen down the aisle while she continued yelling about suing everyone. The pilot straightened his collar and addressed the passengers, apologizing for the disturbance and thanking them for their patience. He assured everyone that they would be taking off shortly. The rest of the flight was blissfully uneventful. When we landed in Los Angeles, we learned that Karen had been arrested and charged with assault and interfering with a flight crew. She was facing serious fines and potential jail time. Some people just don't understand that a little kindness and patience go a long way. I've been putting off my grocery shopping all week, caught up in my job as a high school teacher. Between grading papers, preparing lessons, and dealing with teenage drama, I hardly had time to breathe, let alone stock up on essentials. But with my fridge looking more barren than a desert, I knew I couldn't procrastinate any longer. I hopped in my trusty old sedan and headed to the local shopping center. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small complex with a grocery store, a few boutiques, and a couple of fast food joints. The kind of place where you'd expect to get in and out quickly without any fuss. The underground car park was relatively empty, which meant I could avoid the usual weekend chaos. I spotted a convenient space near the entrance and smoothly pulled in, nose first. There was a large pole on my left, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The space to my right was empty, and I made a mental note to be careful when opening my door. I grabbed my reusable shopping bags and headed into the store. As I wandered through the aisles, ticking items off my list, I was pretty much daydreaming about my night. Home-cooked meal, a glass of wine, and maybe a good book or a movie. Simple pleasures, but after a long week, they seemed like pure luxury. With my trolley full and my wallet considerably lighter, I made my way back to the car park. That's when things took a turn for the weird. When I approached my car, I noticed a sleek, expensive-looking SUV parked next to me. It was backed in, which struck me as odd given the tight space. But what really caught my attention was a man standing between our cars. He was tall, probably in his mid-40s, dressed in a crisp, button-down shirt and slacks that screamed, "I'm important." His driver's door was wide open, almost touching my car, and he was engrossed in what seemed to be a very intense phone conversation. I gave him a friendly nod as I approached, trying to navigate my trolley through the narrow space. He barely looked at me, continuing his animated phone chat. I shrugged it off and started unloading my groceries into the boot. After returning my trolley to the designated area, I came back to find Mr. Important still in the same position, still on his phone. I needed to get into my car, so I politely asked him to excuse me. He turned slightly, giving me the most disdainful side-eye I've ever seen. It was as if I'd just asked him to hand over his firstborn child. Reluctantly, he shifted slightly and closed his door, allowing me just enough space to squeeze into my car. The moment I settled into my seat, he flung his door open again. Now I was trapped. If I reversed, my wing mirror would definitely hit his door. And with that pole on my left, I couldn't swing my car the other way either. Taking a deep breath, I lowered my window and tried once more to reason with him. I politely asked if he could close his door so I could leave. He turned to me, his face a mask of annoyance. Without a word, he held up one finger in a wait gesture and turned his back on me, continuing his oh-so-important phone call. That's when something in me snapped. Maybe it was a week's worth of stress, or maybe it was just the sheer audacity of this man's behavior. Whatever it was, I decided I wasn't going to be a pushover. I closed my window, locked my doors, because you never know, and looked directly at him. Then, with a sense of satisfaction I didn't know I was capable of, I laid my hand on the horn. The sound echoed through the car park, bouncing off the concrete walls. The man spun around, his face a picture of shock and outrage. If looks could kill, I'd have been 6 feet under. But I didn't flinch. I kept my hand on the horn, meeting his glare with raised eyebrows and a steady gaze. For a moment, we were locked in a silent battle of wills. The horn blared on, drowning out whatever important conversation he was having. I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, his desire to continue his call warring with his need to make the noise stop. Finally, he got into his car and slammed the door shut. I released the horn, the sudden silence almost deafening. I mouthed a thank you to him, giving him my sweetest smile as I reversed my car. I may have been just a high school teacher in an old sedan, but for a moment there, I felt like a hero in my own small way. When I landed a job at the local Department of Environmental Protection, eager to make a difference and naive enough to believe every day would be about saving the world, little did I know, my greatest challenge wouldn't be tackling pollution or preserving ecosystems. No, it would be surviving the relentless onslaught of pranks from my coworker, the office jokester. From day one, he marked me as his prime target. Maybe it was my wide-eyed enthusiasm or my tendency to take things a bit too seriously. Whatever the reason, I became the unwitting star of his daily comedy show. It started small. A whoopee cushion on my chair here, a fake spider in my desk drawer there. I tried to laugh it off to be a good sport, but as the weeks went by, his pranks grew bolder and more elaborate. About 2 months into my new job, I returned from lunch to find a sticky note on my desk. "Call this number." It read, followed by a phone number I didn't recognize. Being the diligent worker I was, I dialed without a second thought. When I called, I asked for Myra Maines. The receptionist seemed confused and asked me to repeat the name. I did, explaining I was told to call this number. That's when the receptionist told me I had called the local crematorium and they didn't have anyone by that name there. As realization dawned on me, I heard muffled laughter from across the office. My prankster co-worker was doubled over, tears streaming down his face. The whole office soon knew about my call to the crematorium asking for my remains. I laughed along, but inside I was mortified. But that was just the beginning. He had a certain fondness for what I'd call olfactory warfare. Whenever I was on an important call with a client or supervisor, he'd sneak up behind me and let out the most noxious farts imaginable. There I'd be, trapped at my desk, trying to maintain professionalism while engulfed in a cloud of his foul creation. During one such incident, he whispered for me to enjoy the aroma, calling me a newbie. I desperately tried to shoo him away, explaining I was on an important call. He just grinned and said that's what made it fun. His pranks seemed endless. Fake memos about non-existent meetings, swapping out my coffee for decaf, even once convincing the IT department that I'd requested my computer be set to Swedish. It was exhausting. But then, one day, the tables turned. Another coworker, let's call her B, decided she'd had enough of his antics. She concocted a plan so brilliant, it put all his pranks to shame. B posted an ad on our office intranet, supposedly from our prankster, selling a silver teapot. She used his real name and phone number. The photo she used was making rounds on the internet. At first look, just an ordinary teapot. But if you looked closely at the reflection, you could see a rather portly man in what appeared to be some very questionable attire. The prankster's phone rang off the hook for days. People calling about the teapot, snickering, making thinly veiled comments about his interesting hobbies. He was beside himself with rage and embarrassment. And who did he blame? Me, of course. He called me, furious. He accused me of being behind the prank, threatening to make me regret ever stepping foot in the office. I tried to defend myself, saying I wasn't clever enough to pull off something like that. But he didn't believe me, telling me not to play dumb and warning that I would pay for this. Despite my protests, he remained convinced I was behind it. The pranks intensified. More farts, more fake calls, more embarrassing situations. I was at my wit's end. Then came the day of the mussel incident. I was sent to investigate a complaint about a foul odor coming from a garden supply store. They had piles of shucked mussels that were, to put it mildly, ripe. I did my best to avoid the slimy, stinking piles as I conducted my inspection. But somehow the smell clung to me, particularly my boots. The drive back to the office was nauseating. When I approached our building, a plan formed in my mind. A way to finally get back at my tormentor. It was petty, it was juvenile, but after months of his pranks, I couldn't resist. I snuck into his office. He was out that day, and meticulously rubbed my mussel-scented boots all over his carpet. Back and forth in a tight grid pattern, making sure to cover every inch. Then I closed the door and waited. The complaints started rolling in almost immediately. Co-workers were asking about the smell coming from his office, wondering if something had died in there. I feigned innocence, suggesting maybe he had left some food out. When the prankster returned the next day, he was horrified. He couldn't work in his office, the smell was so bad. He kept popping in and out, checking to see if it had dissipated. He loudly complained, asking if someone had planted a dead animal in there and exclaiming how disgusting it was. I casually suggested it might be karma for all his farts. For days he complained about the mysterious stench. He cleaned, he sprayed air freshener, he even had maintenance check the vents. Nothing helped. I kept my secret until the day he left the company. When he was packing up his desk, I finally confessed. I reminded him of the awful smell in his office a few months back. When he cautiously acknowledged it, I hinted that the mussels from the garden supply place had made quite the impression. His face cycled through confusion, realization, and finally, grudging respect. He left, calling me a sneaky bastard and admitting he didn't think I had it in me. I quipped back that I had learned from the best, or should I say, the worst. I guess, to survive in a world of pranksters, you gotta be willing to get your hands a little dirty. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.